Have you ever come across something so ancient and mysterious that it makes you question everything you believe? What if I told you there's a book that drives people mad just by reading it, and that anyone who gets too close disappears? The Voynich Manuscript isn't just a book, it's a portal, a kind of Pandora's box that once opened cannot be closed. Those who try to decode its secrets end up losing more than their sanity. They lose themselves. When I first heard about the Voynich manuscript, I was skeptical. It was just a weird book, right? A medieval mystery that cryptographers had spent centuries trying and failing to decode. The story fascinated me, but it was something more than curiosity that drew me in. I felt compelled, like there was something in that book meant for me. I read every article, watched every documentary. I even booked a flight to New Haven, where Yale University keeps the original under lock and key. Most people don't know this, but Yale has restricted access to it for years, though a few digital copies float around. I felt a bit ridiculous showing up in person just to look at a replica in the rare books room. But the longer I sat with the manuscript, the stranger things became. I would stare at the symbols for hours, lost in their loops and whirls, and time would just slip by. I'd get home at night and my mind wouldn't shut off. Then one night, I had a dream. It wasn't like other dreams, though. It felt so real. I was in a dark forest and the trees twisted around me, their branches almost moving like fingers, guiding me forward. I saw a figure standing far off, watching me, and in its hands, it held the Voynich manuscript. I tried to approach, but each step felt like walking through molasses, heavy and impossible. When I woke up, I was drenched in sweat and shaking, convinced something had followed me back from that dream. The next day, I couldn't shake this feeling of being watched. Every time I'd turn around, there'd be nothing, but I could sense it, like someone or something was always there. It got worse over the next few days. People in my life noticed too. They'd comment on how distracted I seemed, how I looked like I hadn't slept in weeks. I started reading up on others who had obsessed over the manuscript, like those Renaissance scholars who'd gone mad after months of study, leaving behind writings about strange voices and visions of dark figures. In my desperation to understand, I reached out to a historian who'd spent his career researching the Voynich. He agreed to meet at his apartment in Florence, where he kept his research notes. When I arrived, though, the place was dark. I knocked and called out, but no answer. Just as I was about to leave, I noticed his door was slightly open. Against my better judgment, I stepped inside. There, in his office, was a wall covered with clippings, notes, and sketches, all dedicated to the manuscript. But something was wrong. The sketches showed the same dark figure from my dream, shadowed and featureless, holding the manuscript in twisted hands. The historian's notes described visions similar to mine. I was convinced he had found something he wasn't supposed to, something that drove him to the edge and pushed him over. I turned around to leave, but then I noticed a small notebook on his desk, with a single line scrawled on the open page. The book is a door, but to where, I do not know. Just as I read it, I heard footsteps behind me. When I turned around, there was no one there. But I felt it, that same figure, watching, waiting. I bolted out of there, but not before I pocketed the notebook. Have you ever heard of phantom limb syndrome? It's when amputees feel they're missing limbs, a strange trick of the mind. But what if those limbs didn't just feel real? What if they led you somewhere you were never meant to go? The lost limbs of amputees in St. Petersburg aren't just sensations. They're restless spirits, guiding their owners toward something dark, something ancient, buried beneath the frozen Russian soil. In 2018, I lost my left leg in an accident. When I woke up from surgery, I felt this deep emptiness, like something was torn from me. The doctors said I might experience phantom limb syndrome, that I'd probably feel my leg even though it was gone. They told me it was normal, that my brain would adjust. What they didn't tell me was that I'd feel my leg in ways that no doctor could explain. It started as a tingling at first, a mild itch that wasn't there. But soon it turned into something more. I began to feel my leg moving, pulling me, almost like it had a life of its own. At night, I'd wake up drenched in sweat, feeling like I'd just run for miles through snow and ice. And every time, I'd dream of a vast, ruined city beneath a pale gray sky. In the distance, I'd see other figures, hobbling or crawling, all drawn by the same pull. It was haunting, but something told me it was more than just a dream. When I mentioned it to a friend, he introduced me to a support group for amputees in St. Petersburg. At first I thought it would be like any other support group, people sharing their stories, finding common ground, but then I heard the others talk. They described the same dream, a dark city beneath the snow, an endless march towards something old and unspeakable. One man even pulled up his pant leg to show bruises along his stump, marks he couldn't explain. Another woman recounted waking up with mud caked under her fingernails as if she'd been crawling through the dirt all night. Our group grew obsessed, trying to find answers, but we hit a wall. That's when we reached out to a local historian, a woman who specialized in Siberian folklore. When we shared our experiences, she went pale. She told us about an ancient city, supposedly buried beneath Siberia, a place where the dead walked with the living and the spirits of those who had suffered roamed endlessly. The historian arranged for a hypnosis session, hoping it might reveal more. We all went under together, and in that shared state, we saw the city clearly. Its buildings were broken, crumbling stone structures covered in ice and frost. But in the center was a strange circular ruin. It pulsed like it was breathing, and symbols were carved into the ice, symbols that felt as old as the earth itself. Then we heard them, the whispers. They told us to come closer, to dig deeper. When we woke up, the historian had vanished. We tried contacting her, searching for her, but it was like she'd never existed. Now, every night, I dream of that city, feeling my phantom leg pulling me closer. I don't know what's down there, what we're being called to, but I'm afraid that one day, I won't wake up from the journey. Have you ever heard a voice whisper your name when no one's around? What if I told you there are people in a remote Himalayan village who claim to hear whispers every night, drawing them out into the freezing darkness? The night whisperers aren't just some village ghost story, they're real, and they may be calling for anyone who dares to listen. Growing up in Shimla, a town tucked away in the Himalayas, ghost stories were a part of everyday life. But one legend stayed with me more than any other, the night whisperers. I was about 10 when I first heard it from my grandmother. She described these whispers, gentle, insistent, saying your name as you drift off to sleep. They'd call you to the woods out into the freezing night. The whispers came to those who were lost, lonely, or broken in some way. And once you heard them, you could never unhear them. Years later, I found myself back in Shimla, nursing a broken heart after a failed relationship and a move back to the village. The days were fine, spent helping my mother, but the nights, those were different. On my first night back, as I lay in bed staring at the frost-covered window, I heard it. My name, whispered softly, coming from just outside. I sat up, and everything was silent. But then I heard it again, clearer this time. A chill ran down my spine as I strained to listen. Each night the whispers grew stronger, more insistent. One night I decided I couldn't take it anymore. Wrapping myself in thick layers, I ventured out into the biting cold. The whispers led me down a path to an old oak tree, where a small group of villagers stood in a trance-like state, eyes closed, murmuring softly to themselves. It was like they were under a spell, drawn here by the same voice. I approached an older man, one of my mother's friends, and gently shook him. He jolted awake, his face twisted in fear as he realized where he was. He told me the night whisperers had been calling him since he'd lost his wife. That night, he had no memory of coming to the tree, but he wasn't the only one. We found at least a dozen other villagers gathered in the woods, all having heard those same whispers, all having answered. As we stumbled back to the village, my neighbor leaned in and whispered, "Once they call you, they never let you go." He told me about others who disappeared over the years, just gone in the night, never to be seen again. The whispers would start, and then they'd vanish. The last thing I expected was a knock on my door the next morning. Standing there was a woman I didn't recognize, dressed in strange, tattered clothes. Her eyes were wide, like she'd seen a ghost. "Are you one of them?" she asked in a trembling voice. "The ones who hear the whispers?" I nodded, my heart pounding. She stepped closer and whispered, "Don't go out there again. Once you do, the forest remembers." I tried to ignore her words, but each night, the whispers call louder, and every night I feel myself slipping closer to that ancient oak tree, helpless to resist. Have you ever felt eyes on you in a place that should be deserted? What if I told you there's a cornfield in Indiana where people claim to see faces peering back at them, even though no one's there? The abandoned cornfield in Indiana isn't just haunted, it's alive, and it's watching. A few years ago, I moved to a small town in Indiana, a place where everyone knew everyone, and the biggest attraction was a corn festival. It was supposed to be a fresh start, but things took a dark turn when I rented a small house just on the outskirts of town. It was a beautiful spot, surrounded by cornfields stretching as far as the eye could see. But that first night, I knew something was off. I was unpacking in my living room when I noticed a shadow moving outside. At first, I thought it was just a deer or maybe a farmer checking his crop. But when I stepped outside, there was nothing, just rows of corn, silent and still. I shrugged it off, but as I was about to go back in, I saw something strange. A faint outline of a face, barely visible among the corn stalks. I froze, blinking, and it was gone. In the days that followed, I started seeing faces more frequently. They'd appear for just a second, flickering like mirages, but always in different places. The strangest part? The faces seemed familiar, but I couldn't place them. I'd catch glimpses of a young woman with piercing eyes, an older man with a crooked smile, even a child. And each time, they'd be watching me, unblinking, as if waiting for something. When I asked around town, people either brushed me off or avoided my questions. But one night, an older woman stopped me at the grocery store. "Stay out of that field after dark," she whispered. She went on to explain that decades ago people had begun to see faces in the corn, but no one knew why. Over the years, rumors grew of people disappearing. Some locals believed the cornfield was haunted by spirits, others thought it was cursed land. A few even swore they'd seen the faces of long-lost relatives or friends staring back at them. That night I couldn't shake her warning, but curiosity got the best of me. Just before midnight, I grabbed a flashlight and ventured out. The field was eerily silent with only the soft rustle of corn, and then, one by one, they appeared. Faces, dozens of them, flickering in and out of the shadows. But this time, they weren't just watching me, they were speaking. It was like they were calling me, their mouths moving in silent screams. My flashlight flickered, and I turned to leave, but suddenly, I was surrounded. The faces pressed in closer, their expressions twisted with desperation. Then, one of them, a woman with hollow eyes, spoke. "Help us," she rasped, her voice like a distant echo. "We're trapped here, and soon, you will be too." I stumbled backward, but something in the field was pulling me in, roots twisting around my ankles. As I struggled, the woman's face stretched into a silent scream. Just as the darkness closed in, I saw my own face reflected back at me in the corn, staring with wide, terrified eyes. Have you ever gone hiking alone and felt like someone was right behind you even though you knew you were alone? What if I told you about hikers who have gone into the Smoky Mountains and claim to see figures that no one else can? There's something lurking in the Smoky Mountains that's beyond our understanding. People go in and some never come back, but the ones who do, they bring something back with them. A few months ago, I took a solo trip to the Great Smoky Mountains. I'd hiked there before, so I thought I knew what to expect. Just me, the trail, and a break from the noise of everyday life. But right from the start, this trip was different. On the first night, I woke up to the sound of whispering right outside my tent. My heart pounded as I lay there listening, but the whispers were faint, and when I unzipped my tent, there was no one. Just the silence of the forest and the cool mountain air. On the second night, things took a turn. I was camping on a secluded ridge when I saw something move out of the corner of my eye, a figure standing among the trees. It was tall, too thin, with limbs that seemed to stretch unnaturally. I tried to tell myself it was a trick of the shadows, but then it moved. It tilted its head, watching me. I felt a chill go down my spine, and I could swear I heard it whisper my name, soft but clear, like it knew me. The figure disappeared, but that night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt it drawing closer, like it was just outside the tent, waiting. At dawn, I packed up and started heading back down the mountain, shaken but relieved to be heading home. But as I made my way down, I passed other hikers. Each one of them had a strange look in their eyes, almost vacant, as if they were in a trance. One woman even muttered as she passed, her voice low and eerie, "They never let you leave." Back in town, I thought I'd put the experience behind me, until a few weeks later, when I woke up in the middle of the night. There, in the shadows of my room, stood that same figure from the ridge, watching. I reached for the light, but before I could turn it on, it whispered again, my name filling the room. This time, though, it said something else too. "You brought us back." Now every time I close my eyes, I feel its presence. It's in my dreams, in the corner of my eye, always there, watching, waiting. And I know it's only a matter of time before it calls me back to the mountains. For good. Have you ever been to a flea market and stumbled upon something that just didn't feel right? What if I told you about a man in Vietnam who bought an old doll, only to find out it held a dark secret? In Da Nang, there's a doll that's been passed down through generations, each owner experiencing inexplicable tragedies. And now it may have found its next victim. Last year, I was traveling through Vietnam, exploring the markets and soaking in the local culture. On my last day in Da Nang, I came across an old flea market filled with relics, trinkets, and antiques. One stall in particular caught my eye. It was filled with faded photos, old jewelry, and strange little artifacts. But there in the middle was a doll, a delicate porcelain thing with a chipped face and blank, staring eyes. Something about it drew me in. The vendor, an old man with a haunted look in his eyes, told me the doll had been in his family for generations. He said it was a cursed doll, one that had been passed down through the women in his family, each one dying under mysterious circumstances. I laughed it off as local folklore, but the man grew insistent, warning me not to buy it. Yet the more he warned, the more curious I became. So against his advice, I bought it. I brought the doll back to my hotel room, and almost immediately strange things started happening. That night, as I was drifting off, I heard a soft humming. I opened my eyes, but the room was silent, the doll still and lifeless on the dresser. The next night, it got worse. I woke up to find the doll on the floor, even though I was sure I'd left it on the dresser. I tried to ignore it, convincing myself it was just a coincidence. But by the third night, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I woke up in the middle of the night to find the doll staring at me from the foot of the bed, its eyes somehow darker, almost aware. I felt a chill in the air, like something was watching me, and the humming started again, louder this time, filling the room. I grabbed the doll and threw it across the room, but the humming continued, relentless, like it was coming from everywhere and nowhere. The next morning, I decided to return the doll. When I went back to the market, though, the stall was gone. No one remembered the vendor, and I started to wonder if he'd even been real. With no other choice, I left the doll by the beach and took the next flight home, hoping I'd left it behind for good. A few days later, a package arrived at my apartment in the States. Inside was the doll, staring up at me with that same vacant, unblinking gaze. Now, every night, the humming returns, louder, closer, and I know it's only a matter of time before the curse catches up to me. If these tales sent chills down your spine, hit like to let me know you survived. Subscribe for more haunting stories straight from the shadows. And don't forget, click the playlist on the top left to explore more real-life horrors, or check out the video on your screen to find out what really happens when you visit IHOP after midnight, if you dare.